what to expect during today's session. We're going to talk a little bit about the business drivers of why Discover Financial chose to pursue a virtual assistant, ways to mitigate negative perception of AI in enterprises, and the process Discover developed for building and deploying virtual agents, as well as ideas of metrics that should be captured to ensure virtual assistants continue to be adding value to your organization. So a little bit about Discover. Discover was actually my first customer I worked with when I came to Google about 14 months ago, and I walked into the meeting after they had done a bake-off for NLP tools to help with a virtual assistant, and I walked in and they seemed really smart, and I was like, oh my gosh, like if all customers are this easy or this smart, my whole job is gonna be like the easiest job in the world. And it turns out that wasn't entirely true, but working with Discover has been really fantastic because they use really intentional decisions and careful processes for like enabling technology that enhances the customer experience across their enterprise as well as with their external customers. And they are also pushing boundaries and stretching the capabilities of what the virtual assistant and Dialogflow can do with innovative approaches to testing, metrics, and deploying the agents across the enterprise. So I'd like to welcome up Price to talk about it. He's a senior business manager for digital automation.
Thanks, Rachel. So as she said, I'm Price Fetter. I lead automation in our digital servicing channels here at Discover. Quick, obligatory legal disclaimer. There we go. So a lot of people think of Discover as mainly just a credit card company, but we also offer a slew of banking products, checking, savings accounts, to personal and student loans. But really our goal is to help people achieve a brighter financial future. And really that means that we put the customer first in everything we do, from the processes we have in-house to the products we deliver to our customers. So a little bit more about us. We're available in 190 plus countries. We have 15 network partners around the globe in China, India, Japan, Africa, South America, just to name a few. But we have over 100 million touch points or interactions with our customers to service their accounts annually, and that's supported by over 8,000 of our customer service experts. In the digital space specifically, we've had 12 years of experience with messaging with our customer service experts, and as that channel has matured, we've seen explosive growth. And just over the next 5 years, we're expecting 60% year-over-year growth in those digital channels. So really, we're looking for ways to support that. And so we came to the conclusion that we needed a virtual assistant, but we don't think of it as a cost-cutting measure per se, but more of a way to deliver a service that our customers really are looking for. Our customers really want something that they can get answers to their questions as fast and as easily as possible with every brand, not only Discover. So that was the original driver behind why we decided to go with a virtual assistant. But not only that, we're seeing some really great, lift with our agents. They're able to handle the more emotive, complex conversations now, which enables us to, enables them to really have a better interaction and touch point with our customers. And then finally, because of this, we're able to kind of deliver new capabilities for the channel, things that we weren't originally thinking about. But how did we get there? Many people within our enterprise have a perception of AI. You know, Hollywood. You can thank Hollywood for Terminator, for RoboCop, for HAL 9000. You can thank PR disasters for Twitter bots and stuff. And that's really what people think about when AI comes to mind. What they don't think about is what they interact with on a day-to-day basis that is AI. Spam filters, voice assistants, maps, And so we really had to ground them in what was reality versus what they perceived AI to be. And we also had to make them more comfortable that we were actually putting the customer first and thinking about how we introduced AI to Discover. So, for example, we disclose, if you will, that our customer is interacting with the virtual assistant every time. And then if we do end up having to transfer that conversation over to a customer service expert, we tell them as well. So it's a transparent experience for our customers. When we rolled out the virtual assistant, though, we had to really think about how this would affect our customers. And we also had to think about the best way to define value for each of the intents or inquiry types. So we looked at the volume in our channels, for instance, to understand what the most high traffic intents were. Once those were defined, we went and defined kind of a happy path for the customer, looked at areas where that conversation might break, and really figured out the best way to communicate with our customers for each of these intents or inquiry types. Once we were able to develop and deploy an intent, we still have to make sure that we're legally compliant, we're checking all the boxes with risk, et cetera. But then once we launch, we don't just leave it and walk away. We're in the channel constantly monitoring our customers' interactions with our virtual assistant and making sure if there's better ways to communicate with the customers, better ways to improve the kind of flow of the conversation, ways to improve our models by introducing new training phrases, et cetera. And now I'm going to show you a quick demo of just a sample interaction with what we've been able to develop over the past year. It's just going to show a sample interaction with the customer on our website, and then moving to the mobile device while maintaining that same conversation across channels, and then transferring over to an agent when the conversation gets a little more complex. So you notice we don't build in a delay or anything, any fake typing bubbles for the interaction with our virtual assistant. That's really to show that we're not trying to deceive or make sure our customers aware that they're actually interacting with a virtual assistant. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John to kind of talk about how we've utilized Dialogflow and what we've built on top of it.
Thanks, Bryce. Hi, everyone. John Coyne. I'm a software engineer at Discover. As Rachel mentioned, early last year, we performed a thorough evaluation of different NLP providers, where we ultimately decided to go with Dialogflow to implement our virtual assistant. We then spent the remainder of the year building out the platform and the necessary automated processes to deploy our assistant. So today, I'm going to cover some of the building blocks that you can use and some of the performance measurement tools to confidently build and deploy a virtual assistant. So during our evaluation period, our primary goal was to measure the performance of intent detection. So what's an intent? Quite simply, a user question or intention. And really, it's the first and the key step to building a virtual assistant. If you break down a virtual assistant into two high-level components, it's detecting what the user wants and helping them fulfill that intent, or what's known as in fulfillment. Now, we actually have a separate team that manages more of the fulfillment side of things, and that's more procedural in nature, where you're basically going out to fetch user data or performing an action on behalf of the user, where the intent detection side is where more of the AI machine learning comes into play. And that's what my team focuses on, and that's going to be really the theme around my talk today. So for those who aren't familiar with Dialogflow, let me explain some of the basics. A Dialogflow agent is a virtual representation of is a logical representation of a virtual assistant. To your agent, you add a number of intents, and then to each intent, you add a set of training phrases. The training phrases are then basically used to customize your model that's really built on top of Google's underlying NLU models that are built from years of experience. So your training phrases really should include examples of how a customer might phrase a specific question. For example here, I have an intent called available credit, where a customer is asking, their intent would be inquiring about their available credit to spend is what it is. And you can get some of this data from actual customer messages that you would either sanitize or anonymize as part of your input to this. One of the important features of Dialogflow that we liked was something called confidence. Essentially, with each intent detection that Dialogflow performs, it returns you back a score to indicate how confident it was in that intent it just detected. And this was really important to us to be able to make intelligent decisions about our virtual assistant replies. Dialogflow allows you to set a minimum threshold that if the confidence score does not meet that threshold, they can do one of two things. Return you back a fallback intent or no intent at all. A fallback intent can be something just like a clarifying statement asking the user to reword their question. But this is something that we decided not to implement because really it was more important for us to be able to get it right than try to automate it. And if you actually notice here, something that we do is we set our minimum threshold extremely low, just 10%. Now, it doesn't mean that we're actually sending the replies back to users in all the scenarios, but what we're doing is we're collecting data around on the intent detection process so we can make more informed decisions about how we want to really send our replies back. And I'll touch on this a little bit more later. So the testing process that we established during our evaluation period is something that we've actually built into our daily process as we're adding new intents and we're updating existing ones. To start off with, you have to scour for real data from customers, whether it be from an existing IVR channel, chat, or it could even be inbound email channel. But you really have to spend some time to actually get good labeled data. So here's a customer message, and here's what intent you expect to get back. And something to note is you want to make sure that your training data that you use for the training phrases is separate from your testing data because you don't want your results to become biased. So when you have your labeled data with a message and an intent, you can send it through the Dialogflow's API to detect the intent. You get back a name of an intent along with a confidence score. And then from there, you compare the detected and the expected intent. You can generate a set of core metrics. Now, we do this on a per intent basis. Essentially, for each intent that we have defined, we go through and calculate each one of these metrics. So giving a couple examples, if a customer said, why is my credit showing as $0? If we detected this as the intent available credit and we expected to get available credit, then while we're calculating available credit metrics, we consider this a true positive. However, if we're calculating the metrics for another intent called payment posting, we consider this a true negative. Because we did not expect to get the intent payment posting, and we did not get back the intent payment posting, and that's the definition of what a true negative is. For the purposes of our individual intent metrics, this is not as important, but we still notate it. The true negative, that is. Let's say for another message a customer said, it shows my payment posted, but I have no credit available, just wondering when it will be available. If Dialogflow detected this as payment posting, but we expected to get the intent available credit, then while we're calculating available credit metrics, we consider this a false negative, but conversely, for payment posting, we consider this a false positive. So once we're done with this process, we then calculate a set of more advanced metrics that can give us some better insights. First one is known as precision, or positive predictive value. We can use this to determine if we have problems with false positives. And really, it's defined as the total number of tests where a specific intent was detected, for example, available credit, what percentage of those were correct? Another intent known as recall, or sensitivity, or true positive rate. can be defined as of the total number of tests where a specific intent was expected, for example, available credit, what percentage of those were detected correctly as available credit? And this will let us know if our intent is too narrowly defined and missing messages that it's intended to pick up. So using our simple data set from the previous slide, we would end up with a precision of 100%, but a recall of only 50% for available credit. So really, these two metrics are complementary for the purposes of measuring performance. Precision could be 100% with only one true positive if we had no false positives. But if recall is low for the same intent, then it really means it's missing almost all messages entirely. It doesn't really provide much value. Recently, we've actually started calculating a new metric called F1 score, which is the harmonic average of both precision and recall. As the number of intents has grown, it became more cumbersome to look at so many different metrics. So the F1 score provides a single number that we can look at to look at our intent performance. So comparing a couple intents seems easy enough, right? But what happens when you scale up to 10, 50, 100 intents? This is where a tool known as a confusion matrix can really come in handy. Using the output data from our test process, we can generate essentially a heat map of the intent detection performance. We map the detected intent along the rows and the expected intent in the columns, and in each cell is the percentage of times where those intents meet. So if you see the dark line from the top left diagonal down the middle to the bottom right, this is where the detected and the expected intents match. And this is what we want to see. Basically, the lighter shade means less confusion, or less times they meet, and the darker shade is what we want to see in the middle. So anytime we see a darker shade outside of that middle is where we have areas of opportunity. So for example here, I've highlighted an intent called unrecognized transaction that's been detected 19% of the time when we really expect to get pending transaction. So what can we do when we see this? There's a few different things. One of them is we need to go down into the training phrases for each of these intents and look for similarities that we can try to eliminate. The second thing that we could try to do is actually adjust the confidence threshold. Perhaps if we increased it, there could be less false positives for unrecognized transaction. Lastly, you might just need to combine these two intents into a single intent and then build the conversation flows out to direct the user down the right path. So now I'll touch a little bit on the Dialogflow agents that we use. Similar to common software engineering practices where you have different development, test, production environments, we do a similar structure for our Dialogflow agents. And our development and training environment is where all of our updates happen, manually either via the Dialogflow console or via some processes that we built out via API calls that they provide to update the training phrases. When we're ready to promote to the next environment, we can execute a deployment pipeline that exports from development to our staging environment. Here we can perform acceptance testing and run some regression tests before we're confident enough to deploy it to production, where we actually extract out the entire configuration to an artifact that we send into our artifact repository, and we execute another pipeline to deploy that into our production environment. There's never any manual updates happening into production. It's all through processes that are automated. Being a financial institution, we're highly regulated. Having auditable processes that are repeatable is really important. So expanding a little bit upon the pipeline I just talked about, this is something that our business product owners can initiate and manage themselves. It runs through all the tests and the metric generation that I've talked about, and it compares the metrics against the prior version, so you can actually see where things have improved, or you may have introduced some issues. And then it actually generates a summary report for you that will highlight the changes for you instead of having to go search for them. So while an engineering team has built out this process, it's something that a business or product owner can easily execute and interpret the results themselves. So now I'd like to give a quick demo of this process. And full disclosure here, this is a pre-recorded demo. I wanted to be risk averse and also cut out a couple minutes from the middle. So right now, I'm logged into the Dialogflow web console here. I'm updating our training agent, and I'm editing the intent available credit. Here's the training phrase section. So what I'm actually going to do here is the phrase that we saw earlier in my example that got detected as payment posting, even though I'm going against my own advice, I'm going to go ahead and add this as a training phrase, knowing that it's in the testing set, and I should see performance improvement, I would hope, right? So let's go ahead and add that. We'll save the changes. I'm going to hop over to another tab here. This is actually an internal web tool that we've built out for our business product owners to help manage our virtual assistant. They can do a number of things from this tool, and one of them is actually run that deployment pipeline. Oops. So here, we're going to go ahead and select the source as the training agent, and we're going to deploy that to our staging agent. And once we kick off the deployment here, we get a message saying our job is started. I'm going to hop over to our continuous integration server and just go ahead and explain some of the steps that are going on here. So one of the first things that we do is we export the source agent. Dialogflow provides an API where we can actually extract the entire configuration into a zip. So we do that for the source and the target, and then we perform some validation tests. This is mostly just to look at the content. Dialogflow provides a capability to set up like a custom payload for your responses that we use like dynamic slots for user data. So we're just doing some schema validation there to make sure it's well formed. The next thing that we do is actually generate a difference report. So basically any intents that were added, anything where training phrases were updated, or any content that's changed, we're going to list out all the changes that have happened. Sometimes if there's multiple people that are updating the agent, we want to make sure that we list out all the changes and we have that documented. Next thing that we do is think about this like unit tests in software engineering. Certain phrases, we want to make sure they're always detected as specific intents, so we make sure that those pass. If not, we're going to fail the deployment. Next thing that we do is run through all the tests and metrics that I've talked about, and then we actually perform a threshold validation, making sure that our metrics at least meet a minimum standard, or else we'll fail the deployment. So after that's done, we'll get a Slack notification to our team channel. Here our product owners can then go ahead and check out the results. We send a link that they can go ahead and download, and we actually require an approval. Obviously we want them to check the results out first before they approve the actual deployment. So here, I'm going to go download our difference report, and hopefully that we see just one change was made. And here we can see intent changed, available credit, and here's the training phrase that I added. So that's good. Now we'll go into our test evidence folder. Here we can see there's a confusion matrix, there's the test metrics, and the raw test results, every single message and what it was detected as if we want to investigate it. Not that we do it every time, but it's there. So I'm going to go ahead and download the summary report, and here we can see, okay, the precision increased for payment posting. That's good, less false positives there. But it looks like the precision decreased for a couple of other intents that I wasn't expecting. The recall did go up for available credit, so that's good. True positives went up there. But the recall actually went down for a number of other intents, so it's pretty interesting. Really, kind of what this highlights is, machine learning AI is not really an exact science. You can't always expect, something's going to work out the way it is. And just having a process like this that we can automate really helps us to enable to do this at scale. Okay, you can click back. All right, so now that we've deployed to production, how do we monitor our performance and continue to improve it? So within our internal web tool, we've actually built out a process where we can view the messages and what they were detected as. We can go ahead and annotate those as either correct or incorrect, and if they were wrong, what was the right intent? This allows us to do a couple different things. One of them is actually generate the performance metrics of our real production model, right? It's one thing to be able to look at in a test environment saying, okay, this is how we should do, but it's much more valuable to see how you're actually doing in production. Second thing that we do is actually create an automated process where we can export some of these messages into our test environment. Let's say a message was detected at a very low confidence threshold, but that was the correct intent. We can go ahead and try to add that to our development environment to see how it improves the performance. Lastly, we can generate something that's known as an ROC curve. Here we plot the false positive rate along the x-axis and the true positive rate along the y-axis for varying confidence thresholds. So for example here, I've highlighted at an 80% confidence threshold, minimum threshold, I can expect to get about a 3.9% false positive rate and a 42.3% true positive rate. So circling back to my previous slide on confidence, right, if we had our minimum threshold set at 80%, we wouldn't be able to collect any of this data to the right. So by setting our confidence low, collecting the data, we can analyze it and make a more informed decision about how we want to set our confidence thresholds. Otherwise, you're just taking a guess. So talking a little bit about how we utilize this data in production, our high-level process, basically when we receive an incoming message, is we first go to Dialogflow, detect the intent, and get back a confidence score. Part of our business logic is then, one, looking to see if we have that intent enabled, and two, if it meets the minimum confidence threshold. We enable the confidence threshold to be set on a per intent basis. If one's not set, we use a global default. So now you might be asking, why would you have an intent enabled or disabled? Why even have that in your Dialogflow agent? And there's a number of different reasons for this. One of them is, if you have something deployed and you see an issue with it, being able to quickly turn it off is, something that is useful to us. You could say, why not just delete the intent out of Dialogflow? But as we've seen, making updates to your model can have unintended consequences. The second thing that allows us to do is actually deploy new intents to a smaller number of channels. We can actually control these settings at a per channel basis. So we have a channel where only employees can access. So sometimes we'll beta test a new intent in a channel where only employees will see it before rolling it out to the broader public. And the last thing that we can actually do is define intents that we're either not ready to fulfill yet, or we just don't have a desire to fulfill. This can deflect away from giving incorrect responses. One example might be for an intent increasing the user's credit limit. Let's say that somebody comes in and we see them ask, I want to decrease my credit limit. Maybe this isn't a common request. So if this was detected as the increased credit limit intent, it's going to end up with a bad user experience. So by quickly defining a new intent to decrease credit limit, we can go ahead and get that detected, but then routed to an agent to handle it so it has a better customer experience. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn over to Price to wrap things up here.
So yeah, just some of our key takeaways, some of our learnings over the past year. When we started this process, it was really, we needed to tackle kind of the preconceived notions that people think of when AI is brought to bear. So tackle those head on, bring examples of what AI is in their everyday lives, and that'll really help people understand that it's not this monster under the bed kind of thing. When we defined our processes for taking an intent and really defining the customer value, the value for us as a business, and all the way through production into post-production, and being able to train and improve that experience post-launch. We really didn't reinvent the wheel there. We leaned on existing processes. We used metrics from other channels so that when we were talking about the virtual assistant, it wasn't confusing everybody in the room. Big for us, be customer focused. We, and John mentioned this earlier, we're able to introduce new intents that we're not necessarily fulfilling to get the customer to customer service expert as fast as possible and not get them stuck in this loop of, did you mean this, did you mean that? Just really trying to provide the best customer experience possible is really what has helped us through this process. And then the last two kind of go together, enabling the business to get the insights and the data they need to deploy this at scale, using it to deploy new intents, make changes on the fly when it comes to confidence thresholds that we use, changing the kind of language that the virtual assistant uses and that the customer sees when they're communicating with the virtual assistant is really important to us. And so being able to do that at scale is really crucial for us.